In this episode, we reviewed Death in Venice, which was released in 1971. This was directed by Luchino Visconti. He co-wrote the screenplay with Nicola Badalucco, and it was adapted from the book by Thomas Mann. It starred Dirk Bogarde, Bjorn Andresen, and Silvana Mangano. Welcome to Robert Bellissimo at the Movies. This is a YouTube video podcast exploring storytelling on film, as well as interviews with industry professionals who work in film, television, theater, among other areas of the arts. I want to welcome back to the show Raquel Stetcher, who is a film historian and critic. She's a writer for Turner Classic Movies, DVD Netflix, and has also contributed articles to the Library of Congress, The Dark Pages, Film Detective, and Cine Suffragette. In 2007, she started the classic film blog Out of the Past, and in 2018, branched out with Quell Movies, a website devoted to new releases. She is a certified critic for Rotten Tomatoes and Cherry Picks, and a member of the Online Association of Female Film Critics. Raquel, welcome back. Always a pleasure to have you.
Thanks for having me back. I love being on your channel, so I'm excited to talk today.
Me too. I'm really excited to talk about this one. And for people who haven't seen Death in Venice, I'll just give, even though it's like impossible to give a summary of this film because it's such a complicated story. But the little plot here on IMDb is while recovering in Venice, sickly composer Gustav von Aschenbach becomes dangerously fixated with teenager Tadzio. Okay, so now, before we agreed to review this today, had you seen it before, or was this your first viewing?
I had seen it before. I'd seen it a few years ago, and then I saw it again somewhat recently. I've seen it a couple of times, and I'm not sure how I stumbled across it. Probably it was on Turner Classic Movies or Criterion Channel, and I thought, oh, I'll give it a shot. And it's a beautiful movie and very morally complex too. So it's fascinating and a little bit horrifying.
Yeah, I initially saw it. I think I was trying to pin down when I first saw it, but I'm pretty sure it was around 6 years ago because I love Dirk Bogarde. I think he is such a fantastic. Everything I've seen him in, he is such an incredible actor. And I went on a bit of a Dirk Bogarde binge, like 6 years back. And so I saw this and I didn't initially take to it. I don't think I quite grasped what it was really getting at. I mean, it's such a challenging film. I mean, he's not giving you all the answers here. He's not spoon feeding anything. You really have to see it and go to it and really think about what it's about as well as feel it. But for me, seeing it once is you haven't even seen it. I think you have to see it at least 2-3 times because it's so challenging. Now, what were your feelings this time around when you saw it again? Was it any different than when you initially saw it?
For sure. This time, I remember the second time I watched it. I watched it first just to see it, and I don't quite remember when that was. But the second time, I saw it because the documentary about Bjorn Andresen came out about his experience making the film. So I had seen it then. But this viewing, I really wanted to get at the thematic elements. And you're right about it being ambiguous. It is really, it's not giving you a straight answer about anything about the plot or the protagonist's intentions or anything. It's kind of left for your interpretation. But with this viewing, I paid more closer attention to the philosophical conversations that were happening, because the movie, there's not a lot of talking except for the flashback sequences where Dirk Bogarde's character Gustav is talking to his music student, Alfred, and they're having these really intense conversations, really debates, like really heated arguments about anything about like beauty evil, genius, time. Like they're talking about some really heady subjects, and that's really how you get to know Gustav as a character and who he is. So this viewing, I paid more attention to that, and it ended up being a more richer experience watching it. I gleaned a lot more on this viewing than I had the others, because I think the other viewings I had watched just to watch it and kind of enjoy the visuals and the director's kind of vision for it. And then the second time was more to learn about one of the actors. And then this time it was more thematic.
Right. Well, yeah, you're right in terms of those themes you mentioned, because there's so much to unpack in this film about what it's about. And I had to go back and watch those, debates with with Alfred a few times, because these guys are so intellectual that
Yes.
it's not exactly easy to grasp what they're talking about. But my impression the essence of what they're talking about is like the nature of art. And Gustav, who is this person who believes that he can create everything basically from his mind and control everything, and he approaches his music like that as a composer. And Alfred is got this other point of view where it's like, yeah, but there's also emotions, and beauty comes from spontaneity. You can't just create beauty. It's something that is spontaneous. It's either beautiful or it isn't. And then they're arguing, we talk about this film being ambiguous, and Alfred is like, yes, art is ambiguous. And again, because Gustav thinks you can control everything, he doesn't want to feel he can lose control of his work. And so he feels that it's not ambiguous. But I love what Alfred does. Like, he literally goes and plays the keys on the piano, and it's like you see every single note. People can take this in all kinds of different ways, and he's right. And I think it's a great lesson, and this balance that Gustav is trying to find between the mind and using his emotions. I don't think he ever quite got to, until he died. I mean, that was the struggle. But apart from that, were there other things that stood out to you about what this film was exploring?
Yeah, I mean, like you were talking about, we learn more about Gustav's approach to art, the fact that he wants to control his art. He believes that it's tied to morality, whereas Alfred believes that genius is inherently evil. It's a divine affliction. Like they
Right.
have some serious debates, and the whole point of the debates is to get to learn a little more about Gustav's approach to art. Like there are some really great lines. Like there was one where Gustav was saying that um that art, finding your creation is like being a hunter in the dark, or hunting in the
Yes.
dark. You don't know what you'll find until you hit your target. And I thought that was really interesting. Whereas like like you had mentioned, Alfred's perspective on art is very much that it's spontaneous and can't
Yeah.
be controlled.
Right.
But the point of their discussions, where Alfred is pretty much saying like it's okay to be evil, it doesn't have to be tied into morality, whereas Gustav is very much wanting to be in control. And we see that throughout the movie. He talks about being in control of his art,
Mm.
and it making sure that it is moral, whereas he's constantly struggling to find control in his life. He's dying, so he doesn't have control of his health. He, even the argument with the gondolier, like he wants to be left off at one point, and the gondolier is like, no, we can't do that because they won't take your luggage, but he insists on it.
Yes.
So there's this control that he wants. He wants to control, his image. He doesn't want to come off as like like I mean, this is something that's very important in the topic. Is he gay or is he not gay? You
Right,
know,
right.
so he sees that very flamboyant man at the beginning at the boat, and he's kind of horrified, and then later on in the movie he's dressed kind of like him.
Yes.
So like he's in control of his image, his emotions, like, but he's also completely fascinated with this young boy,
Right.
and he's constantly trying to control his emotions for it. Like he's very curious, but he knows he can't be too intense about it. So I know I'm rambling now,
No,
but
no, not at all.
the whole conversation with Alfred is interesting because this is a man who really seeks control, and throughout the movie it kind of feeds to that he's trying to be in control of his demeanor, his appearance, and what's happening around him. But he can't be in control because he can't control this boy. He can't control the cholera epidemic that's about to
Right.
come to Venice. Like he is not in control. So it's very much a battle of that internally.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I love the way the film begins where he's on this boat and he's coming to Venice, and like you said, there isn't even a lot of dialogue in the film. I mean, it's like
No.
it could almost be a a silent film. And this is why it's so important, I think, to go back and see it again, because we only gradually get to know him with these brief flashbacks. So I think, at least for me, the first viewing is more like just piecing it together. But then once you know a lot more about him, I think you can pick up on a lot more when you go back to it. But I just love the fact that he's going towards this boat, and so much of this is about what Bogarde brought to it, because he really had to have the feelings of this man so that we, the audience, can
Mm-hmm.
really look at how he's acting. And we don't necessarily know why, again, because everything is gradual. But to me, he looked so unhappy on that boat when he was going to Venice. And then when we see this brilliant sequence when he goes for dinner at the hotel he's staying at in Venice, and he's all alone, and
Mm-hmm.
he's separate from everybody. I mean, then again, he doesn't know anybody, but I think that really says something about him. I mean, this alienation, this need to be alone. And he's there. I took it that he was there for inspiration about how to deal with his art and his music. There's other interpretations one can take as to why he's there as well. But I love that sequence because the camera just roams around that room, and it's like it's a long time, and we hear all these conversations. And they're just talking about, like, oh yeah, I went for one guy's like, yeah, I had a long walk today, and I'll have a good meal and all this kind of stuff. So what they're saying is not necessarily important. It's kind of ordinary conversation, but at the same time, everyone seems to be having a good time. And we look at him, and he's just watching all of these people. And I love that. I think in a conventional film, because perhaps director or the writers would be concerned that an audience would be bored, they would just kind of quickly show that, so we get the quote unquote point of what's going on. But Visconti never does that. He puts the audience right through it, right? I mean, he really has you experience this guy's loneliness, his alienation, separate from everyone. Even later, he goes to the beach, and he has a beautiful shot of all these people on one side of the beach, and there's these two little boats, and he sits on the boat. I mean, it looks like a painting. I mean, he was so influenced by painting as well. It's such a beautiful shot. I was curious what you thought of just that sequence and how he just really puts the audience through these emotions.
So, just to go back to a point you were making earlier, this whole movie is about voyeurism, and you get that from obviously the Gustav character, this composer who's looking for absolute beauty, finds it in this teenage boy and is like following him around with his eyes, and literally also just following the boy's family around to just kind of get more glimpses of this boy. But like you were saying, you get these little bits of conversation that are happening in other tables in the restaurant of the hotel. And it's just, the whole thing is voyeurism. Like, we are listening into these
Right.
conversations that we're not supposed to be listening into. And I thought one scene really struck me this time where Gustav is talking to, I believe, the hotel manager about the incoming cholera epidemic. And the hotel manager is like, oh no, it's nothing to worry about. It's just something that the police do. Um, and the way the camera is showing them, it's actually in between these plants that are in the hotel lobby, and you're basically seeing through like this, like almost like a shadow of the leaves, and the camera's going in, and it's almost like you're a voyeur onto their conversation, even
Right.
though Gustav is the protagonist and we're inherently tied to him through the movie. But even that scene seems voyeuristic. So
Yes.
I thought that was really interesting. And going back to the beach and those sequences, voyeurism is something very tied into the beach lounging experience. You go to the beach, there's other people, you're watching them.
Yes.
Vacation is very much people watching, right?
That's a good point. Yeah.
And I think it's very interesting throughout the movie. There's quite a few beach sequences, and he's very isolated on purpose, even though he's surrounded by all these people, like you had said, which gives him almost like a cushion. Like, he's supposed to be there. Look at all the other people being there, but he's also just a voyeur,
Yes.
basically spying on this boy. So, and the beach sequences are just some of the most beautiful, especially that amazing ending.
Oh, absolutely. It's interesting. And I suppose it didn't truly stand out to me, but because Venice is just so beautiful no matter what, but but he is shooting it in a pretty dreary way at the same time. I mean, a
Oh
lot of
yeah.
the, yeah, and I was like, why did that never actually really dawn on me? It's not like the David Lean Summertime, where it's like, look, everything is so like gorgeous, and that has a lot to do with that story. But here, we have this like epidemic happening. We have this man who's dying, and he's in the most beautiful city, one of the most beautiful cities. But at the same time, every year, Venice, sinks a little more, right? So in a way, Venice,
Right.
Venice is like, has been like this dying city for such a long
That's
time,
true.
uh, um, just like he is. But one thing that I found interesting in that dinner sequence at the beginning at the hotel was that he first, when he gets dressed and ready to go, he takes out these pictures, one of a woman and one of a child. So it's like, okay, that's obviously his family. And then as the camera's panning around, I don't know if you thought this, but I did. Like, it stops on this little girl who looks a little like his daughter, and then the woman with him looks a little like his wife, and it's just, he kind of hangs on them for a second, and then we go over and we see Silvana Mangano and Tadzio, and then he's there. And I thought that's such an interesting choice, that he was looking at this family and then Tadzio, because as we find out later, his daughter died. We don't know what happened to his wife. Like, I don't know if he's just there
More
alone.
ambiguity.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know if they like separated, or if he's there, if he's just there on his own. No one knows. But as you know, to me, I think, as much as people talk about like he was lusting over Tadzio, which is true, I think it's an oversimplification, because he also really looks at Silvana Mangano as well. Like, there's like a long time when he's just looking at her. So because he's not telling you exactly how to feel or exactly what this guy's thinking, it's really up to you. But I thought he also could be feeling like, wishing that he was a part of this family. It's like the family that we find out later is gone in his life. He sees this young boy, this perfect beauty, this idealized vision of beauty, beautiful mother, this perfect looking family in his eyes, and it's like maybe he also wanted to be like the father in this family. I don't know if that
Yeah.
was anything that what you were thinking, or I was curious what you thought about that.
There's actually a sequence later on in the movie, and it's interesting how Visconti does this, where you get flashbacks, but you also get imaginary sequences where, Gustav is just imagining a scenario. And later in the movie, he learns about like the seriousness of this cholera epidemic,
Yeah.
and he goes in his mind, it switches over to an imaginary sequence where he's envisioning going to this Polish like wealthy lady and her family, warning her that she needs to
Yes.
take her family, and he names Tadzio.
Yes, he does. Yeah.
So that indicates that he already knows the boy's name, having not even met the family, and he pets the boy's head. And for a second, it just seems like, oh, that's real. That's really awkward.
Yes.
But it goes back to what you were saying, that he also envisions himself like a father. Like he wants to protect this family from this disease that's encroaching. It's too late for him. He's dying, but he could save this family by warning them in a way that he couldn't save his child and his wife.
That's yeah, exactly. That's how that was something that I felt was going on as well. And even as he was watching Tadzio on the beach, Tadzio is with this young man and they're like arm in arm with
Mm,
each other. And they look like they're a couple, you know. I mean, I don't know. I mean, again, it's really up to you. They could just be, you know, buds or something, but it it gives you that impression. And then if when you cut
right.
back to Gustav, he's smiling, and so you know he's enjoying watching this. Someone in another podcast thought, well, maybe he was jealous, which is, you know, possible. But I thought, you know, he's probably, here we are in Italy, and at this time, you know, the book is 1912, so it takes place in 1912, and homosexuality was not illegal in Italy until the Nazis came to power. It was legal. So, you know, perhaps he's thinking, geez, I wish I had had that freedom when I was young. You know, it's sort of like he couldn't explore his homosexuality because you'd be persecuted. But here he's looking at this young man and he's falling for him. And I think it's also this feeling of I didn't get to have young love. You know, I didn't get to do any of these things when I was young. So again, to think like, oh, you know, dirty old man lusting over a teenager. Again, I think I mean, again, you know, to me, it's just, it's not that simple. I think there's so many layers. There's so many things you can take from what he's experiencing. I don't know if was that anything you were thinking in terms of seeing Tadzio with this other guy, and then they even like get into a fight later. I was curious what you thought about that.
Yeah. I thought it was like, I mean, ambiguity and voyeurism, I think, are the two biggest themes of the movie.
Yeah.
It is left to interpretation because, especially in the final sequences, they get really rough, and
Yes.
like, the other boy is like pushing Tadjo's head into the sand.
Yeah.
And again, like Gustav is watching and is concerned for the young boy. So it is kind of open to interpretation. But when I was researching kind of the background of the movie, I thought there's some things that were interesting. Is that Visconti himself was openly gay. Dirk
Yes.
Bogarde was closeted his whole life.
Yes.
Um, Bjorn Andresen had mentioned that the entire crew was mostly gay men, and Visconti had specifically told the crew um, not to ogle Bjorn
Yeah.
Andresen.
Don't even
Like
look at him.
very much like there was a shield around him.
Yes.
So I think my point in that is that there was this consciousness that there was a gay subtext to the story, but
Hmm.
they had to be really careful at the time. Whereas Visconti could be openly gay in Europe in the era that this was um release, but there was going to be problems in America. They had even suggested Tajo to be a girl.
Right.
instead of a boy, because there was going to be a pushback from an American audience. So there's this kind of carefulness from the beginning, knowing that this has a gay subtext, but they need to be very, very cautious
Yeah.
about how it's portrayed, because there was already pushback from the beginning. So that's where I believe all the ambiguity comes
Yeah.
from, because
Yeah.
I haven't read the full novella, but I have like perused it enough just to kind of compare. And the stalking that happens in the novella is much more intense.
Mm.
It to the point where Tadzio's mother and I think governess actually catch on and get concerned and start to warn the boy about him.
Oh, really?
That's scaled back a lot in the
Yeah.
movie so
Yeah.
that it's creepy to a point, but doesn't cross the line. And I
Yes.
think that's what a lot of this movie does. It kind of pushes the boundary, but not so much that you can't say, well, it could be interpreted another way.
Absolutely. Because there's so many ways to look at it. I mean, the Tadzio has also been described as like the angel of death. Like,
Yes.
it's possible that this whole thing is in Gustav's head, or it's like the afterlife. Like, here he is in this boat coming to the city. It's almost, the whole thing feels almost like a funeral of some kind. And
Right.
which I thought was interesting because Tadzio also has this scene where he's playing the piano and Gustav's watching him. And then we go to this flashback where Gustav is at a brothel and the woman is playing the exact same song that Tadzio is
Oh
playing.
yeah.
And I thought to
Yeah.
myself, it's almost like one can interpret this as if Tadzio is the angel of death and he is here to get Gustav to really look at himself, and
Interesting.
that was one thing I thought, it's like, I'll be so beautiful, I'll appear as the perfect beauty so that he'll really have to look at his repressed homosexuality. And all these things are the angel of death forcing him to look at himself. So that brothel scene was so interesting because he goes to this brothel. You don't know why he's there. You don't know when this was. You don't know if he's married at this point or when it was. And it looks like he's about to have sex with the prostitute there, and then he just leaves. He just leaves, and he looks like he was ashamed to have been there. So, is that because he realized he wasn't attracted to her? Is that because he felt guilt over his marriage? Is he trying to explore something in his sexuality? There's so many
It's the
things
most
you can take.
confounding scene in the whole movie. I still think about it. I'm like, what is going on? And then there's that fantastic close-up where the prostitute is holding his hand and like they're like he's trying to pull away and she's gripping really hard.
Yes.
And I'm just like, what does that mean? Like, he already paid her
Yeah.
for services she didn't render. So why is she gripping onto him so much?
Right.
And I don't know. Yeah, there is so much. Like, Visconti really offers the viewer a lot here. There's a lot to see. There's a lot to observe. There's a lot to think about.
Yeah.
And it's a movie you can watch multiple times with different perspectives and to garner different things from each viewing. It's just I mean, it's a morally complex movie. It can make you feel a bit icky, but also it's fascinating and it's beautiful, and the music too. I'm not really much on music in movies, but the way he obviously it was changed from Gustav being an author to being a composer, which makes sense because that way Visconti could play up the music with I forget who the composer was for this movie, but they also play. Oh, they use Mahler,
and they even modeled the way Dirk Bogarde looks, the mustache.
Yes.
They modeled it on him, which was
and just to point to that final sequence, which also plays into what you were saying about Tadzio being the angel of death, because Tadzio is there at the moment of Gustav's death, where he is alone but also not alone.
Yeah.
I thought that was interesting, but the way the music plays out in that sequence,
Oh yeah.
it just kind of builds up to the death, and
Yes.
it's just absolutely amazing. And it reminded me of Lars von Trier's movie Melancholia, where there's this big sequence. I'll have to spoil it for people, but basically there's two planets colliding, and that's the whole point of the movie. You know it's coming. And it does it the same way, and I'm wondering if Lars von Trier was actually inspired by Death in Venice, because it's the same. You're kind of, you see the horizon in the background, you know what's coming. The music builds up, and it's just spectacular, and then
Yeah.
it leaves you kind of emotional at the end. It's really interesting.
It's an extraordinary sequence, and it's one, like I said, even when I first saw the film, I didn't really take to it, but it's one scene that I is like unforgettable. And again, that's where another reason, I mean, I can't totally take credit for like the Angel of Death interpretation, because I've heard other people say that, which made me just look at it this way. But even the
Yeah.
way it's shot, like he's like, it's almost like he's disappearing, like it's almost like he's walking on water, like as he's out there
Yeah.
walking, and then he points up into the air, right? And then Gustav dies, and it's just like, yeah, now it's time for you to die. You know, I'm the Angel of Death, and I'm here to take you. And just that melting. I mean, another big part of this film is aging. You know, like he cannot accept, again, this guy who needs to control everything about himself, he cannot accept the fact that he's aging, and he goes to this barber, and the, you know, again, the barber, it almost feels like he's telling Gustav everything Gustav wants to hear. He's like, you know, like,
Yes.
oh well, you're graying because you're not controlling your appearance. I don't know if he said controlling exactly, but it was something like that. And so again, he gets the ink, you know, the ink to make his hair black.
Oh gosh.
But then he looks like a corpse. Like he paints his face white. He
He
puts red.
does.
I was like, like
The
if I
barb
went
was like,
to,
it'll make you look younger,
yeah,
and it makes him look like he's a ghost that's
he
been
looks,
painted on. It
oh,
looks
he looks
awful.
awful in that ink on his hair. He looks
And
so
also, I
terrible.
think it ties into that man on the boat at the very beginning.
Yes,
He's got the black
the
dye
same
on his
thing.
hair. He's got the lipstick on. He's kind of got the, like, he doesn't have it as pale as Gustav does, but he has the face makeup too. And in the beginning, Gustav is disgusted by the sight of him, but at the end, he's allowing this barber to do that transformation to himself.
Yes,
And I think that's when we see him starting to lose control. Like, I mean, he's losing control throughout the whole movie, but he's really lost control over at this point. He's letting the barber do this, and then eventually he loses control of being, in existence. He dies. So
exactly. Yeah, I mean,
I think it's just interesting.
he literally melts, and you know, the barber is like, well, now you can fall in love whenever you want or whenever you're ready. And again, it's like, it's interesting because that is what Gustav believes. It's like, I can do it when I want to do it. But that's what's so interesting to me, because I never found that he truly grasped this letting go of himself. I mean, you could obviously, you can't totally let go of yourself, but you know, being able to follow his impulses, the closest he gets, I found, was at a certain point, because I think it really spooks him how attracted he is to Tadzio. I think it really upsets him and scares him, and you see that when he goes
Yes.
back to his hotel room, he, again, because Bogart is such a great actor, he looks like he feels awful, and he looks at his wife's picture, and he's kind of like, oh my god, why am I experiencing this? And that's when he decides to leave, like, I'm gonna get out of here. And he goes to the train station. It's so interesting because up until this point, he didn't care about his baggage at all, about what happened to his baggage. And then the guy's like, I'm so sorry, your baggage is actually got sent to Como by accident. We'll get it to you in Munich in a few days. And he's like, I won't go anywhere without my bags. And then he says he's going to wait there for the baggage. And then he's so happy and he goes back. And I thought, I bet you, for me, it was almost like to him, it was a sign that he shouldn't leave, that this was a good sign.
Yeah.
Like, yes, I should stay here. And you see, as he goes back, he's smiling, and then he sees Tadzio on the beach, and he kind of just waves through the window, and he looks so happy. And I think, again, in a conventional film where you have that character, that traditional character arc where they learn something and grow. I mean, in this case, it resembles life even more because he gets somewhere, but then then he has problems, even with that, because then it's about the aging, and then it's about the plague, and then he won't leave Venice. It's just gets more and more complicated. It's not just, oh, now yes, I'm gay, I'm out. It's just, this
No,
guy's
it's
got a lot of
true. Like
problems.
he's trying to do the right thing, and then circumstances prevent him from doing the right thing. And he's like, "Great, I can keep doing the wrong thing for a little longer."
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
it's what it came off to me. I mean, it's not like exactly black and white like that, but it is really interesting to see how he's acting like he's upset, but then he turns around and he's actually quite happy that he can stay there for a bit.
Yeah,
And he would probably stay there for much longer had it not been for this epidemic. And he's not even concerned about the epidemic for himself. He's
right.
concerned about Tadzio and his family and getting them out of there. So yeah, like we said before, this is very there's a lot of ambiguity, and there's a lot of also conflicts, like internal conflicts. He feels one way, but he also feels another way, and those two things conflict with each other.
Exactly. And the touching back on that guy at the beginning who had similar white makeup on the boat, it's interesting because this is another reason why one may be able to look at this like it's a dream, or it's some kind of an afterlife, because the guy, like, pays tribute to his sweetheart, and you're like, who is the sweetheart? Is he because it's almost like this guy knows what's going to happen, right? And or is it like, does he know about this guy's wife? I don't think so. I was like, I don't know if that was something. I didn't actually catch that. Someone on another podcast mentioned it. I thought, oh yeah, he is saying
Oh,
like sweetheart. He's like, tribute to, salute to your sweetheart. And you're like, what is this guy talking about?
I didn't catch that. I was just
Yeah.
like, I guess I was more thinking of something else. But yeah, I mean, like I could watch it again and try to see.
Oh
Like there's
God, yeah.
certain scenes, like maybe I'd look at the scene with the prostitute a little closer, or the scene on the boat, because those end up being really important, but also really confounding at the same time.
Well, like I said, I had seen it twice before, like, 6 years ago, and I think I watched it again 3 or 4 years ago, and then this time I watched it again, and then I was like, I have to watch it again. Like, I literally watched it back to back, which I mean, I'm all for revisiting movies. I mean, I can, I again, a really good movie will offer more and more each viewing, but this was one where I just immediately wanted to see it again, because there's it's so rich, it's so complicated, it's so there's just so much going on that you kind of have, like, for me anyways, I kind of had to just sit down and watch it immediately. And again, I saw so much more. But to me, this is just a masterpiece. Like, I just truly, truly love it. And one thing I've been battling with is, again, this he's lusting over a teenager, which of course is wrong. Obviously
Mhm.
that he's stalking this boy, and he can't help himself. And I thought, well, why did I did think to myself, why did it have to be a boy? Why couldn't he be like 20 or something? Because at least one thing I was thinking is, this guy, if he's been repressed his denied his homosexuality his whole life, he's been around, young men, adult men, probably, and he's been able to control it. Like, the guy he's been debating with, one can interpret there's an attraction between the two of them, the way they passionately share their views, and the concern that he has for Gustav, and things when he was getting sick, which we see at the beginning. So I thought,
And he has an excuse there because he's the mentor for this
Yes.
student who wants to become a composer.
Right.
So there's an excuse for that relationship where there is no excuse for the Tadzio relationship at all. You know, like he can't really come up with anything unless he was, you know, being hired to be like a piano teacher or something. But there isn't really, he can't hide behind the guise of being a mentor.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
also in the novella, the boy is 12 years old.
I read that. Yeah.
And in this, and actually, I you know, the movie is ambiguous, but the behind the scenes information about how this movie was made actually sheds a whole different light on this. But Visconti really wanted a 12-year-old
Oh, did he?
and was
Okay,
looking
I
for
didn't know that.
12-year-olds, but Bjorn Andresen was 15, but he
Yeah.
looked very young
Yeah.
and he was very slender. He actually looks a lot like Timothy Chalamet. He's like the Timothy Chalamet
He does. Yeah.
of the
Yeah.
early
There's
70s.
a
He's got
resemblance for
like this
sure.
he's got this like kind of these sad eyes, this very angular face, this hair that became a huge hit in the 70s. Like if you look at any of the 70s teen magazines, like Leif Garrett like had that shaggy blonde long hair. That was a huge thing. So he has like this really amazing look, and that's why he was chosen for the movie. But he is a bit older, but not so old that it's he looks more adult. Like if they had waited a year, he would have
Yes.
looked a lot different.
Yeah.
So I think it's interesting that I mean, he's still a minor. I mean, I
Right.
don't know what the rules were at that time, but also the sad part of like 70s films is that there is a level of eroticism, kind of grossly sexualized women and children in movies.
Right.
And I was really interested in Brooke Shields' documentary that came out recently, and she's talking about how
Yeah.
she was in these movies playing prostitutes and being naked, and it's like it's really problematic.
Yeah. Yeah.
um and there was pushback towards this movie, but it was a little more accepted in Europe, which I
Right.
think is interesting. You know,
Well,
I know this is like a difficult subject to talk about, but it's also the reality of the era.
yeah, for sure. It is difficult to talk about it. I was a little, nervous about talking about it because because I love the film so much, and then I'm like, but then it has this guy stalking this teenager. But again, I thought it was interesting that he doesn't judge the character. He puts you
Yeah.
in these positions where you're empathizing with him. But I mean, you could judge him if you want to. But he's a flawed character. I mean, even the way he talks to people, like the guy on the boat, or the guy in the hotel, or the waiters, like he's really snobbish, like he's really
Mm-hmm.
rude. He's not the most likable person, yet we feel for him, or at least I did. But to me, making him a teenager, because I know in the book he's described as like a statue, like he's like a mythical like he's like, it's like beyond human. He's like this perfect beauty Greek
He's the
god.
absolute beauty.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's almost more like a symbol. Like I don't feel that it's necessarily literal. Like I think it's more about, to me, anyways, it's more about what it was bringing out of Gustav. And I think the fact that he was a minor, it's all the more layered in terms of wanting to be his father, seeing the fact that this guy has young love when he was in his teens, and Gustav couldn't do that. And also, like I said, I mean, he's been around young men so much, and he clearly was able to control it. So the fact that this angel of death is here taking that control away, I think it was all the more shocking for him, that he was like, I'm lusting over this kid, I'm obsessed with him. And he even says later, something along the lines of, what road have I taken? Like, is he talking about now, or is he talking about before?
Right,
So
right.
it's extremely complex. And again, it's fine to say, oh well, this is awful. I think it's fine. I mean, sure, it is. I mean, so if
It's open for interpretation. You could be
yeah.
horrified by it, or you could
Yeah.
acknowledge that it's problematic, but it doesn't cross the line. Like there are
Yeah, he
different.
doesn't like go and try to sleep with him or anything, right? So
Yeah, no, and it's left like, I mean, ambiguous is like the best way to describe this movie. It's
Yeah,
really left open, and doesn't really push boundaries, and I think that saves the movie a bit.
I think so. Yeah,
But also can, I mean, if anyone's sensitive to that sort of thing, they might interpret it one way, and if somebody is maybe like looking at movies of the era, you know, they might interpret it a different way. You know, it's, yeah, it's a morally complex movie. Like, there's
yeah.
problems, and then there's other interpretations that can be had.
Yeah, and the reality is this happens, and it's a part of humans. It's a human quality, uh, that you're in this film grappling with and you're confronted with.
There's always going to be problematic art out there, and
Yeah.
it's really just like, how much are you willing to you know, basically take on to interpret something depending on what the art is and what how intentional it is with its message.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And it's he's a human being with warts and all, and you can either detest it or turn the movie off or what have you. But yeah, I find it to be an extraordinary work. The other thing that was interesting again with we're talking about character, like his character arc, like he gets somewhere in terms of being more free with his emotions, but then this flashback of this concert that goes horribly wrong, and you see he
Oh
even
yeah.
yeah, he wakes up in the night and he's screaming. And I thought, yeah, like if this guy lost his child, we don't know what happened with his wife, and he can't even play anymore. For an artist, that is like death, I mean, that he cannot keep
Mm-hmm.
working because he can't step truly into who he is. And I was really fascinated by that. I mean, the fact that he woke up screaming,
Right.
for him, it's over for him. And I know like Visconti described the film as like an intellectual death, it's almost like
Yes,
the
I was just going to mention that. Yeah.
right. Yeah, like it's almost like Tadzio like killed that control in him, but then the
Mm.
other extreme killed him. Literally, which is why I don't think he ever actually found this balance of the mind and the feelings. I don't know if you had any thoughts on that.
Well, also, I think what's interesting about this movie and other movies about artists who are going through something, there's always stories about that, is that there's a self-destructive quality about artists
Yeah.
that make for actually really good and interesting stories. And in this case, he's on a path of self-destruction because he's losing control, but it's set off by traumatic events, like the fact that his child has died, he's very ill. um so that's one thing that it kind of lightly touches upon, is that, yeah, the artist feels very strongly, and when something like that happens, the reaction is going to be strong as well.
Right.
I think that's something that 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 sequence, and also the flashback sequences with Alfred, do really well, is to explore the really strong feelings artists have about their work,
Yeah.
about their life, about their vision, their passion,
Yeah.
because I mean, they're going to have very strong reactions. Nothing's going to be small or subtle. Everything's going to be
Exactly.
big and profound.
Yeah, I mean, if you suddenly, like, I know myself, like if I suddenly, because I'm, as you know, I also teach, I act, I do this show. If I couldn't do any of these things, I'd probably crumble. I probably would just be like, so I could really relate to his feelings. And I mean, it's one can say that he's just going there to die. I mean, he knows about this plague and he doesn't leave. Like, you know what I mean? Like, he does not leave.
Mm-hmm.
Why would he not leave? Like, is it just because he's so concerned with Tadzio that he gets, and his family, that he gets caught up in that? um it's
And
really up
there's
to
there's
you.
also that hourglass sequence earlier, which to me makes me think that he already knew his death was coming soon, and that's why he eventually doesn't really care about the cholera epidemic for himself. But there's a
Right.
scene in, I don't think it's a flashback, but it is Alfred and Gustav talking, and he's looking at an hourglass that's sitting on a
Oh,
piano.
yes, yes.
And it's I think my favorite scene in the movie, because Gustav is talking about how when the sand is at the top of the hourglass, it seems like there's so much sand and you've got so much time. But then when you get to where the sand is starting to run out, it runs out faster than
Yeah.
when it did, or that's what it seems like. So when you're young, like Tadzio, who is very young, he's the epitome of health and beauty and life, and he's got all this time ahead of him. He's that full hourglass at the top.
Yes.
And Gustav, who he's already lived his life, he's the epitome of death and dying because he's very gravely ill, and he's seeing the sand run out at the bottom, and he's seeing it go really quickly. So there's
Yes.
more of an urgency to live his life, whereas Tadzio doesn't have that yet because he's still got all of his life ahead of him. So I think that's one interesting theme in the movie, is like being at the beginning of your life and being at the end of your life.
Right. And I love that scene too, because he talks about how there's no sense in thinking about death. And then by the time you are thinking about it, it's too late. He says something like that. And so for him, now it's too late, right? And now he's thinking about all this stuff, and there's nothing he can do about it. He has a bad heart from the beginning. He's unwell. And again, I think he got somewhere in learning something about himself. But I'm always fascinated by movies where people are really trying to confront themselves, and it's so hard, and it is hard for anybody. But as much as we may talk about the choices here in terms of why a teenager and this and that, I mean, Thomas Mann, this apparently a lot of this, I'm sure you read, a lot of this is what he experienced. Like he was had this attraction to young boys and stuff, and but he was married and had kids, so he was, this is just something that the film debates the mind versus the instinct and your emotions. And this is as much as we can talk about why they did this or why they did that. I mean, I think I imagine a lot of it just poured out of him. It's just like, it's not even anything you can analyze. It's an experience. It's such an emotional experience, which is obviously the most important thing. Ultimately,
it just is.
Yeah, exactly. It is what, that's the 70s, right? It's like, it is what it is. You could judge them or not. We're not going to judge them. And you can think what you want. Yeah. But I love it. I actually ordered it from the Criterion because I think this is just it's just a work.
I had watched the Criterion DVD this most recent time. I think the previous times I had watched it on the streaming channel.
Yeah, it's I don't know if it's where you are in the States, if it's still there. It's not on the Criterion channel in Canada anymore.
No, it's not.
Yeah.
The documentary though about Bjorn Andresen is on the Criterion channel, but yeah.
Yeah, but to me it's so beautiful that I would love to see it on a big screen. I'm like, I've got to own this. I mean, now we're seeing, I'm sure you read, they cut a scene from the French Connection. Disney owns the rights to the French Connection, and I'm thinking, you know what? If there are certain movies that I just like treasure, like if this starts to happen where they're cutting scenes, I better own a copy. Because we just can't rely on.
That's when it becomes really important. I mean, this, like, the cutting of scenes from movies has been going on for a long time. It's now more noticeable when a company like Disney acquires Fox, and now Fox movies like The French Connection are, able to be cut based off of whatever the company sees fit to fix per their standards. But yeah, like if you do have the original on DVD or Blu-ray, you can see the whole thing without those cuts. And that's one of the benefits for sure of having physical media over streaming, because streaming is temporary. You might not see the whole thing. It might be even truncated for time, like we don't exactly know unless you have a very sharp eye and you know a film really well, there might be stuff that's taken out just to make it a little more compact. So yeah, definitely important to get physical media.
Yeah, now more than ever. I really liked The Most Beautiful Boy in the World, the documentary.
Oh yes.
And what
It's
I
so
found,
sad though.
it really is, but he had a lot of problems, like not even
Mm,
after this film, but even before. Like he never met his
yeah.
father. He was brought up by his grandparents. His mother was killed, I believe, right? Like she was,
She committed suicide when he
oh, she
was
committed
10.
suicide. Yeah. So he
Yeah.
didn't, he was, and his grandmother, my impression was that she recognized his beauty and was trying to use it, and that's what led to
Mm-hmm.
this film. And it's interesting when you
Mm-hmm.
when you watch the screen tests of, it's amazing that they
Oh
even have
gosh.
these screen tests, and Visconti's asking him to take his shirt off and stuff. It's
That's
interesting.
horrifying.
Yeah, well, it is, because you can see that he didn't know he was going to be asked to do that, and this
And
is
he's
something.
uncomfortable. You can
Yeah,
tell.
this is something he didn't even want to do.
Mm-hmm.
Apparently, like he just, like his grandmother just sent him there, right? So I don't think Visconti's just thinking about the movie. Like he's probably just thinking, I need to see you with your shirt off. He just wasn't obviously set, obviously, whether he picked up on his discomfort or not, I don't know. But I guess he figured if the kid is here, the kid must know what we're gonna do. Or maybe he was taking advantage. I mean, of being in control of the screen test, or who knows. I don't know, but he obviously knew that this kid was going to have to be on a beach with his shirt off, and he wanted to examine everything about him. So, but yeah, just looking at his discomfort in that, and then everything that happened later, like he became like this Japanese pop star.
Oh yeah.
And he was talking about like living in Paris with like get like these gay men that they just gave him money constantly. It was almost like
Yes.
they just bought him, like he was just like an
He had
object.
spending money. They
Yeah.
just wanted, because what people don't, I guess, what we don't realize watching the movie now, because we're kind of very much detached, this is a movie from over 5 decades ago, is that he became a major celebrity. Like he
Yes.
was plucked out of obscurity, thrusted into the situation by his grandmother, not really a willing participant, but he was like, and also Visconti spent years looking
Yeah.
for the perfect boy for this. He was
Right.
traveling to multiple countries, and in this case, he traveled to Stockholm, Sweden. And I think Bjorn Andresen was like the fourth kid that he had interviewed, and he found his kid. There's like this sadness in his eyes, this androgynous beauty he had, the long hair, the slim figure, and also I believe he said the gray eyes were like the color of the ocean. Like he was
Yeah.
very much
Yeah, he
enthralled
exactly
with
what the
the
book
look.
described. Yeah, that Thomas Mann
And
described.
what's interesting about Bjorn Anderson is because of his particular look and the time, that look was very sought after. It became a trend. Like I had mentioned earlier with like Leif Garrett in the 70s, like pop, like icons. That was the desired look for a teenager, like a teen idol. So he became hugely famous in Europe. And then he became, like you said, very famous in Japan. And they had mentioned in the documentary, there was this word that it's called Bishonen. It means like beautiful boy or androgynous beauty. And that was something that was like at the time really attractive in Japan. So he became a star there. Like they had made a manga comic after him. He had he had a record, he
Yes.
sang, he was in Japanese commercials, like he was a huge hit over there. So there's something very particular about his look that made him super famous at the time. And then it kind of like his life trajectory went in a different direction afterwards. I mean, he's still an actor. He was in Midsommar,
Yes.
the
Yes.
wonderful horror movie. he has this like really terrifying death sequence at the beginning of the movie. But he looks completely different. It's almost like he
Totally
rebelled
different.
against his beauty. He's like,
Yeah.
I'm gonna grow my hair out, I'm gonna grow my beard.
Yeah.
The documentary shows him living in squalor. It's like the
Yeah.
opposite of what you would imagine a beautiful young movie
Yeah. It's
star
ironic.
to be living.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He still has an extraordinary look, but you can
Oh
see
yeah.
like he looks like a biblical character, like
Yes.
he's like, again, he still has this statuesque quality. But yeah, I can see what you're saying. Like he looks like he was trying to rebel against the most beautiful boy in the world,
And that
label.
is something that happens when someone is traumatized by as much attention they are getting for their looks. And he talks about in the documentary how he didn't feel like he earned this
Right.
attention that he was getting, that he was very conflicted about that. And it happens that if you get a lot of attention for your looks, sometimes just to protect yourself, you maybe wear baggy clothes, or you maybe
Right.
just like try to conceal your natural beauty so you can disconnect from that. I think that's kind of what he did,
Yes.
which I mean, it for him it was probably self-preservation, because that was probably very traumatic, the whole experience.
Yeah, and we see that he had a child who died. He lost his family,
Yes.
became an alcoholic. So he
He went through a lot.
yeah, he went through a lot. Yeah, so it was pretty interesting. I was glad I finally saw it, because I was meaning to see it for a while. So that's too bad that things that he had such traumatic experiences. But yeah, I mean,
And
it's sort
also,
of,
just to point out, between this and, if you feel like in Death in Venice, he barely speaks.
yeah,
He's
barely.
speaking a little bit of French in the background,
Yes, yeah,
even though his character is Polish, but he's
yeah,
speaking a little bit of French, but it's not something that you hear very well. And he doesn't have any direct conversations with the Gustav character, so he's very silent. But this documentary gives him his voice back, which I think
yeah,
is interesting, because the whole thing is narrated by him and he's talking about his experiences. You see footage of him from his early days, and then present footage him going to Japan. So it's almost like he's taking ownership of his
yeah.
image back, which is something very satisfying about the documentary.
Yeah, I agree. It's like he finally was able to tell his story, as opposed to
Mm.
the perception of the most beautiful boy who, you even see him at the press conference. Well, he wasn't talking because he didn't speak French, right? So Visconti's doing all the
Right.
talk, but again, he's like just this person to look at. And yeah, it's a really interesting watch. And again, if people want to see it, it is on the Criterion channel. Was there anything else you wanted to mention about the movie?
I watched the documentary when it came out at Sundance a couple of years ago and was really struck by it. So I highly recommend anybody who wants to watch Death in Venice, maybe make it a double bill, like watch Death in Venice and then watch
Yeah,
The Most Beautiful Boy is the name of the documentary. Watch it after, because I think it'll give you a really interesting perspective, because I think, especially if you're a film lover, it's interesting to find out behind the scenes what really happened, how the film got made, what the intentions were, what the fallout in terms of a movie kind of like this, where it did actually have some serious ramifications for one of the actors. It's just interesting to kind of get that rounded experience. So
mm-hmm.
yeah, no, I think I highly recommend that. And anybody watching it, pay attention to those flashback sequences in
Oh yeah,
Death in Venice, because there's some really interesting philosophical debates and it adds a lot of richness. So
absolutely.
highly recommend to if you're doing a repeat viewing, pay attention to those.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And what are you working on these days? I know you got a lot on your plate, but is there multiple things or?
Yeah, right now I'm working on a piece about the Nicholas brothers, who were they were dancers in old Hollywood, 1940s. They had some really amazing moves in these various like musical sequences in older musicals. So I'm writing a piece about them. I'm actually a screener for Indie Memphis. I'm helping them evaluate some of the documentaries they're going to show this fall. And that's a really cool project. And also I've been working on YouTube scripts for Turner Classic Movies. So they have a Film
Oh,
101
fantastic.
series. So I'm only doing like 5 of them for them, but I have ones out about campy sci-fi, about gangster movies. That one was really fun. One about Mildred Pierce and Joan Crawford winning the Oscar. So I highly suggest people check that out because I worked really hard on those and I'm very proud of them.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, I definitely am going to check them out. And where's the best place for people to follow you on social media, your website?
So now I have my own website, raquelstetcher.com, where I put all of my writing. It has links to my blogs, my YouTube videos, my articles with TCM and with DVD Netflix. So all of my stuff is there. I'm mostly on Twitter these days at Raquel Stetcher, but I'm also on Instagram at Kel Movies.
Great, fantastic. And I will leave those links in the description box below for where you can follow Raquel online and check out her website as well as your YouTube channel as well, right? Are you
Yeah,
posting
no,
these things?
I haven't been making videos, but I have a really interesting video idea. I got some books from the Olivia de Havilland auction
Oh
from
wow.
her estate. I got some film books. I'm just waiting for them to arrive, so I'm hoping to make a YouTube video about
Oh,
those.
that'll be great. Great, fantastic. Well, this was such a treat. Thank you so much, Raquel, for taking the time
This was
to,
fun.
yeah, it was a lot of fun to discuss Death of Venice and come again. Let's do it again sometime soon.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, everyone, for watching. I want to thank all of my members on Patreon. If you're interested in becoming a member of my Patreon, head over to the link, patreon.com/Robert Bellissimo at the movies for full details. You can also leave a donation directly to my YouTube channel by pressing the thanks link, which you will find directly below the video frame beside the like, comment links. Just click the thanks link, and from there, you can leave a donation if you choose to. And lastly, if this is your first time here, please consider subscribing to my YouTube channel. It is absolutely free to do so. By pressing the Robert Bellissimo at the Movies logo, you will see it floating above my head in the top left corner to your top left. In just a second, just click on that and then click the bell in order to get a notification every time I release one of my new episodes. Thank you so much, everyone. I will see you in the next episode.